Good morning. Welcome, everyone. My name is Melissa Hawkins. I am the International Teaching and Learning Specialist at the Center for Teaching and Learning at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, and I'm the network leader for Internationalizing Teaching, Learning, and Curriculum here at NAFSA. And I'll let my colleagues introduce themselves as we get started this morning.
Hi, and I'm Melissa Watley. I am an assistant professor of international and global education in the School for International Training's Graduate Institute, and I am the research and scholarship network leader at NAFSA.
Hi, everyone. My name is Suman Pant, and I'm also an affiliated faculty for SIT Graduate Institute. And in the past, I've also worked as the academic director for a semester abroad program in Nepal. So a lot of things that I'll be talking are through some of my experiences and similar lenses.
Awesome. So this morning, today is what I really should say. We're talking, since we're in different time zones, I just want to say that we're talking today about decolonization of the curriculum. And so we have some questions this morning, and we'll just launch right into them now. So how would you define decolonizing the curriculum to someone who has never heard of the term before, Dr. Pant?
All right, so before I get into the definition, I think we should just talk a little bit about what colonization really means. So how I actually see colonization is, it is a way to objectify or the other people, societies that we interact with. And when we objectify them, we basically treat them as objects that are at our disposal, right? That we can use to fulfill our own needs, wants, or just for entertainment. So decolonizing would be changing this perspective, treating the ones that we interact with as subjects rather than objects, which means we recognize them as people or societies with valuable knowledge, capacities, and their own agency. So even if we want to interact with them and gain something from them, there is a process of negotiation that goes with it rather than just exploitation. So that was what I would consider decolonization is. So now decolonizing the curriculum, how I think is we need to start understanding that there are different ways of learning. There are different ways of preserving knowledge. There are different ways of implementing this knowledge into the systems. So when we decolonize our lens, our perspective, we have a better recognition of these educational systems and methodologies. So what it does is it helps us reconnect, seek these different knowledge systems and integrate them into our education system. That is what I would consider decolonizing the curriculum would be. In some ways, it is also finding and creating these tools which allows us to have this different perspective as well. Just having these different perspectives in our head in a very abstract form might not be enough. So creating these tools which allows this different perspective to look at people, societies, and cultures, respond to their knowledge systems and understand their knowledge systems a little bit better, and reconnect with these knowledge systems and methodologies into our own education system so that we are more inclusive and more comprehensive, is what I would consider decolonizing a curriculum would be.
Thank you so much.
And can you talk a little bit about recommendations you would give to an institution that wants to explore options for decolonizing the curriculum?
So I could kind of try to explain how I have been able to understand and access this information. So I would say a starting point is always looking at it from the lens of the post-colonial authors. There's plenty of work written by very famous authors, right from political systems, social systems, culture, religion to education. Why I think it's important is because right now, when we look at our colonial history, we look at it as a history. But when we read these post-colonial authors, we realize that it was happening at that time for them. So a lot of their experiences are very visceral, and I think it helps us really understand how colonization has brutalized these systems, consider them savages, and we've gotten rid of a lot of these education or knowledge systems. So my starting point was, and I would highly recommend starting from post-colonial authors to see their perspectives. And even if there is no exact literature that can help us decolonize the curriculum today, I think just seeing that can help us understand that education systems have also been colonized in the world. Another thing it's important to think about is there is no exact way of decolonizing the curriculum, because that would, I think, defeat the purpose itself. There is no one way of learning or doing things. So that is like, I think, the first step, like just understanding from these philosophical viewpoints. Now, the second point would be to find these resources and tools, which requires us to actually go back and reconnect and build these partnerships as well with other communities. So for example, let's take an example of education that was sidelined. So environmental education or food systems have become very technical with time. But now with climate change, a lot of unpredictability, we're realizing that there was so much of knowledge in these indigenous communities that they were the steward to this knowledge. And so maybe we need to go back, reconnect with them and bring them back. Or even if we're talking about mental health issues, because pharmaceuticals and these very technical aspects of mental health became so dominant, but now we're like trying to move away from it and trying to bring in, like, meditation and other ways of mental well-being as well. And so I think the first step would be to understand the philosophy of decolonization, and the second step would be finding these tools that we have sidelined in the process and bringing them together. So I think we can find a balance between those.
Those are some awesome recommendations. Thank you. I wonder if you can contextualize some ideas for us, perhaps in terms of thinking about different disciplines, maybe how one would decolonize a curriculum in, I don't know, a STEM course or a business course or a study abroad course, a humanities course, any of those, any ideas that you might be able to share with us.
I'll start with the experiential education study abroad course first, just because it's a little bit easier for me to talk about. So especially in, let me give you an example. So in study abroad experiential education, it depends on what program you run and how you want to run, what is your course curriculum. But you can learn about climate change and how it affects people through reports, numbers, figures, this causes this, and you can have a very intellectual knowledge about it. That's true. But in experiential education, what you can also do, because you have this platform to actually go to these communities, you can go and work with the farmers. What it does to you is you actually realize how much farmers rely on a stable weather, particular rain patterns, how they process their food or store their food, even when there is very little infrastructure for them to be able to do that. So in this whole process, any student or professor or any learner can actually humanize this issue. They can actually see like how it is affecting each and every individual. So in experiential education is kind of interesting, because I think decolonization in experiential education is a little bit more straightforward than some of these other fields. But we can look at the same thing through the lens of, like, let's say, for example, engineering. If we go to any major city in the world, all cities have started to look the same. It's like the same infrastructures, like same urban planning and all of that. But we also know that to build an infrastructure, you need to have raw materials. And raw materials are place specific. Some places will have rocks and stones, some places will have sand. So all the raw materials are a little bit different. What colonization has done is it has made all these raw materials universally available. So we've even forgotten what is out there. So a lot of our, like, let's say, for example, in engineering, we are focused so much on the technical aspects of building certain infrastructure. I'm going to just stick with the infrastructure part here. Decolonization would be like to kind of pause that and try to understand what the local resources are. How do we utilize those resources? Even if we are making like these buildings, like thinking about, is it an earthquake prone area, or like, is it a place where, like, the soil sinks? So thinking about all of these things, using knowledge that is local, utilizing local resources, and trying to understand how this works, I think would be a good way of thinking about decolonizing the curriculum, even in like the field of engineering or infrastructure development. Thinking about humanities, let's say, for example, the linguistics of gender and gendered relations. It is true, gender inequality is almost universal, it exists everywhere. But in certain spaces, for example, in a working professional space, gender inequality could mean some kind of professional harassment or being paid less than men. But in completely different society, where maybe there is not like a market system, gender inequality could manifest in very different ways. So although these issues are the same, but they have very contextual meanings. And so in these different fields of education, you can kind of try to understand how these issues manifest in different places, and how can we learn from these very contextual knowledge systems and integrate them to have a more, again, comprehensive and more fulfilling curriculum. I think the crux here is to understand that societies and knowledge are specific. A lot of times they are space and resource specific. So there is no way of decolonizing any field. It's all going to be very specific depending on what values you have, what kind of societies you come from, who you're partnering with. And I think that is what's very important. Second thing, what I would suggest, I would give an example is this: we have this very overly critical view of things. So either we become overly critical or we become too, we exotify things. And I think decolonizing goes a little bit beyond both of those aspects, which means we cannot critique something we don't know. And if we know something, we will be less likely to exotify it. So, going beyond this is actually understanding, keeping an open mind, and embracing different knowledge that are even unfamiliar to us and bringing it together. And I think a lot of these fields can find these little nuggets of knowledge everywhere and bring them all together.
And are there any resources that you recommend for people who want to learn more about decolonizing the curriculum? Anything that you typically suggest to people?
I would say for educators, maybe the starting point is start with philosophers, writers who have actually contributed to post-colonial and feminist scholarship. I think that would be like the starting point, because it gives you the moral value, the foundations of really thinking about decolonization in a very philosophical perspective. When we see how colonizing any system has affected it in the long term, we can actually make a pretty educated guess about how it has really affected education systems as well. And I would say there are plenty of authors to begin with, like Fanon. You can start Paul Freire, Beauvoir, Butler, César, even Sartre. There's so much work out there, and I think that would be the starting point. And after we've done that, I would suggest that other people, community members would be the next place to go to, because even when you have abstract ideas, we necessarily don't have the knowledge or the tools. So maybe building these partnerships can be very useful. So for example, as a study abroad practitioner, we would have partnership with local women's group or local communities. So we would actually understand how they form a community, how do they pool resources and use them. And it's not necessarily written in a book, but there are these very deep knowledge that we can find from the field. And I think it's the same with other educational fields as well, finding these partners and stewards of knowledge and bringing them together. So I think decolonizing the curriculum will be specific to our educators and their values as well, because different educators, again, have different values. We all might not have the same values about what we prioritize in education too. But we also have to understand that there is just so much knowledge out there. So our values might not be the only one. So bringing in these partners to build the curriculum might be very important. However, it is also important to remember that the technical knowledge and skills are also equally important. So just because we have some of these new ideas that we want to navigate and investigate doesn't mean we kind of put away the technical knowledge and technical skills that we cultivate. So I think there has to be time and space given to this new knowledge while we still continue to keep our good technical skills and knowledges in our curriculum as well.
Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Pant. We really appreciate you being here with us today and sharing your expertise.
Yes, I was going to say the same thing. Thank you so much, Dr. Pant. We really appreciate your time today. This has been informative. And we thank you so much for joining us for this conversation about decolonizing the curriculum. Thank you.
Thank you.